Hi, my name is Nicola Turner and I'm the Senior Fair Access Advisor at UCAS. I've been asked today to talk about the role of UCAS in supporting disabled students, both what we do now and our plans for the future. So to begin, here are 6 key ways in which we work to support underrepresented students as a whole, including disabled students and those with mental health conditions. And I'll look at each of those briefly in turn. And just going to start with data analysis and insight. So 18 months ago, we changed the way we delivered our data and analysis, and we recognised that we could probably add more value by combining our knowledge of the policy landscape, including widening access and participation, to dig much more deeply into the data and to use our survey facilities as well to move towards a much greater understanding of our applicants. So this started back in January 2021 with what happened to the COVID cohort, which unsurprisingly looked at the data for applicants in the 2020 cycle and how the pandemic impacted them that year. We also published the first of our Next Step series. That was the experiences of LGBT students in education. This series focuses on a specific cohort and how they make their move towards their next steps from school or college or from whichever situation they're in. And we're due shortly to publish a new report in that series focusing on the experiences of disabled students applying to university in 2022. We want to find out how they've been supported in school or college, what they're looking forward to in higher education, and their experiences of sharing an impairment or condition in the UCAS application. Just to note, we have extracted from that report the mental health data because our summer 2021 report that you can see here, starting the conversation, offered a really deep dive into that data. Those applicants who shared a mental health via UCAS and the intersectionalities of mental health and other characteristics. And also we asked students who did have a mental health condition but who didn't share it with UCAS to explain their reasons for doing that. So although we found a 450% increase in the number of people who have been sharing over the last decade, we found that there is still 49% of students who don't share, largely due to misconceptions about how that data is used. So just to give you a quick preview of some of the findings of our disabled student research, we found an increase, as with mental health, an increase in applicant sharing. We saw a record year in 2021 with over 83,000 UK applicants sharing an impairment or condition with UCAS. Again, we think this is because students are becoming increasingly comfortable with sharing their personal circumstances and also more confident in why we are using that information. We see that learning differences is the most commonly shared impairment. That represents about 5% of all UK applicants. I will also just note as well that students who share 2 or more impairments or conditions, we've done an analysis of some free texts and we found that they are most likely to share mental health conditions with a learning difference and or social, behavioural or communication impairments. So although I do mention that mental health has been extracted from the data, it does still exist within this category. So just bearing that in mind as we look through some of the findings that I'm sharing with you. A really important finding as well that we found that disabled applicants are 1.2 times more likely to defer their place, and that was before the pandemic hit, and we found that during the pandemic that rose to 1.3 times, and that is predominantly due to a lack of support or support being delayed. And obviously over the pandemic that was also a case that students who were shielding because of their health also obviously played into that. So when we look at students who shared a disability through UCAS as a whole and how this intersects with other personal characteristics, we can start to see a bit more detail about their preferences, about their behaviours, but it doesn't really tell us enough. So really to understand the nuances, we need to look a little bit closer. So for example, there are some perhaps surprising results just here. So just picking out here that we saw a higher proportion of students applying from the most advantaged areas in the UK, which was something that we thought was quite surprising given some of the national data. Interestingly, we also saw that students were more likely to be care experienced, almost twice as likely to identify as LGBT. And we also saw that woman to man ratio really narrowing here as well, because although we saw a real split, we see a real split in applicants overall. We see far more women applying than men. We see that gap actually narrows when we look at disabled students overall. But what we really need to do is look at those categories of impairment. So this is the first time we've really taken a deep dive into this data and also looked intersectionally at that too. And that has really, or it is really starting to show some interesting and much more nuanced results here. So here are some headlines really, one for each of the impairment categories that we collect via UCAS. So we see that actually that intersectional data from the overall disability slide is proving to be a little bit misleading in some of these cases, particularly around that socio-economic disadvantage. That's really starting to show that where we're seeing that particular data being driven is through the category of learning differences. We're also seeing some interesting results about post-16 qualification choices, achieved grades, and the types of university that students are applying to. And these, as I say, is just some of the headlines by impairment category. This will be covered in much more detail in the report as we sort of seek to explore that data a little bit more in detail. As well as the data, we also sent out a survey to applicants to the 2020 to start university in 2022. We wanted to find out a little bit more about their research, and we found that they are doing their research before applying on the whole, but there is a lot of variance in how successful they are in finding what they need. So we're finding the information needs to be much more visible and much more easily accessible at the provider level. So in every sense of the word, accessible as well. Students are telling us that if they can't see themselves represented and their needs and support needs represented on a university's website, they don't feel welcome by that, or by that particular university, or perhaps they don't feel as if they will be included as a disabled student. So I think that's a really interesting point that they're making in the free text there. And I thought that was particularly interesting, particularly when we look at that point that I've highlighted on the screen about students being most influenced by the provider's reputation for equality and diversity, more than even the facilities, more than anything else that they are researching. It's the reputation for equality and diversity that they are researching more than anything. So it's not about a specific support need necessarily. It's often a sense of feeling like you belong, a sense of community, a sense of inclusivity. So very interesting that is a particular priority that we're seeing. But we're also seeing in the bottom right hand corner there that sharing is continuing to cause anxieties. So even though we saw that increase in the number of people sharing, and it is important to remember that the survey was only sent to people who have shared in their 2022 application, we still see that there is still some reticence about sharing, and these are students who did make that choice to do so in the end, but they didn't always feel comfortable doing it. And again, if we think about the mental health report, and there was a certain degree of students thinking that this may affect their application. We're seeing again when we ask students about their reasons for feeling uncomfortable, that again there was a misconception about how that information is used and whether that would be used against them in their application. So there still really is a lot of work to do in getting that message across. So again, that's something UCAS can't do alone. We can't change the perception of students just as a single voice. It needs to be something that we do right across the sector, with universities, with organisations such as the NADP and others, in order to really have that unified voice in saying this is not something that will disadvantage you, that this is actually something that is there to make your learning experience better, or to make your transition to higher education successful. So again, looking at the survey, we also looked at impairment category and some of those intersectionalities again. Again, just a few headlines here by impairment category, just showing us a little bit about what students are looking forward to or what they're feeling a bit anxious about, a little bit more about their research behaviours as well. So there's some really interesting divergences between those different categories in terms of how people are feeling. Really interesting to see a bit of a split starting to show between students with more visible disabilities or with impairments that they have to seek particular support for physically perhaps, and those who have those more hidden disabilities as well, who feel much more concerned about higher education, more concerned about the support they may or may not receive, and also those are students who feel as if their experiences in education so far have been less positive. So just moving on to the next hexagon from the first slide, really. Looking at our information and advice, we have worked extensively with the NADP and lots of others such as Diversity and Ability to create student-facing content that's absolutely aligned to the needs that they have. To really talk about the support that's available, about sharing a condition through the UCAS application, and really to help them make good decisions. We also use social media as a really key channel to reach prospective and current applicants as well. And thinking about information and advice, but also about personalisation and targeting, you may be aware of the UCAS Hub, which is a way of really bringing together the wealth of information on ucas.com to students. So students will register for the hub before they can make an application. They don't have to make an application if they register for the hub, but it does start to help them build their application, to make their choices, to start to shortlist the courses. And increasingly, we're starting to think about tailoring content based on student circumstances. So we're looking at different journeys that students are making, understanding different groups of students better, including disabled students, and what their needs may be at different times of that journey, and understanding what information would be useful to them to surface, and when would be good to do that. So that is sort of like part of the work that we have ongoing. Teachers and advisors are an absolutely critical audience. They can make all the difference to students who are making their decisions, and particularly around that thorny issue about whether to share an impairment or condition in the UCAS application. So it's absolutely vital they have the resources and the information they need to support their students. And again, in the mental health report, we did a survey of teachers and advisors and found that they're really keen to support students, but they don't always feel confident about what support is available in higher education. So as a result of that, we have created a toolkit that talks about all sorts of different groups of students, including disabled students. And again, it is linked here. We've also started to develop some online training modules for teachers and advisors as well. So far we have a toolkit about students with care experience, and we have a toolkit about students with mental health conditions, specifically designed to help advisors understand practical ways in which to support those students, right from the point of research all the way through to their transition. As I've mentioned, nothing we do in this space is done without a great deal of collaboration, because UCAS are not the experts on disabled students. We are the experts on applying to universities. So we have worked very closely with a whole range of organisations, some of which are on the screen here. Absolutely not all of them are on there. They help us to do things like develop our content, they attend events, they develop activities with us. They have been really, really involved, everyone here, on changes to our application question, which I'll talk about in a moment, and also that insights and research work. So if anybody does want to talk more about the work we've got going on, please do get in touch. And I mentioned the application question. This went live on the 17th of May for the new cycle for 2023. So a few years ago, a group of us all got together to look at the UCAS application and decide if that was the right approach to talk about disability and mental health, and if there was a better way of doing that. So we had a roundtable discussion, and there's a picture on there of us talking about this very question. And it was decided that the question was right, but it needed to be reframed, it needed to be reworded. The examples used in the categories need to be updated and generally just given an overhaul. So there have been increments leading up to this particular stage, but this is the fully revised question. That there hasn't been a change to the categories. They all still align to the HESA categories, but we've just reworded them to make them much more student facing and much more student friendly in that sense. But we recognise that despite all of these things we're already doing, there's always much more that we can do to improve, both in UCAS and UCAS in terms of supporting the sector to improve as well. So the Fair Access Programme launched last autumn with a sector consultation about what UCAS could do to improve the way it supports access and participation quite generally. And we're about to head into our second year. We've made some real inroads on developing an outreach service to connect students to the right opportunities. We've been engaging with low progression schools, with FE colleges, thinking about how we surface information and advice to students. As I mentioned, the changes to the hub, exploring different journeys with different groups of students, and those changes, ongoing changes to the application. So loads of work coming, and absolutely I'll be in touch with NADP and lots of other organisations to make sure that whatever we do is absolutely spot on for disabled students as well, to make sure that is really fundamental. We've already started talking about how our work for apprenticeships is absolutely aligned to the needs of disabled students as well, and also to understand where the challenges are there. And really, I just wanted again just to mention that that disabled student report is due to launch later this month. Within that report, we will be making a series of recommendations, not only within UCAS, but also the HE sector or the education sector more generally, and also to government, focusing on the findings of that research and aligning to the aims of our Fair Access Programme. So really, we recognise that UCAS's role in supporting disabled students is constantly evolving, as hopefully I've demonstrated here. It's also multifaceted, as I hope I've demonstrated, and absolutely we'll be continuing to work in collaboration with experts to make sure that we are continuing and constantly questioning about whether we are taking the right approach, and whether we are making higher education a more accessible ambition for everybody in all senses of that word. Thank you.